All right. We are going to start reading on St. Anthony the Great tonight. Today, whatever. Same thing. I'm recording this Saturday night, but I'm going to release it on Sunday. So this will be the first section of The Life of St. Anthony the Great by St. Athanasius the Great. You have entered upon a noble rivalry with the monks of Egypt by your determination either to equal or surpass them in your training in the way of virtue. For by this time there are monasteries among you, and the name monk receives public recognition. With reason, therefore, all men will approve this determination, and in answer to your prayers, God will give its fulfillment. Since you asked me to give you an account of the blessed Anthony's way of life, and you are desirous of learning how he began his monastic discipline, who and what manner of man he was previous to this, how he ended his life, and whether the things told of him are true, that you also may bring yourselves to imitate him. I very readily accepted your request for to me also the bare recollection of Anthony is a great source of help. And I know that you, when you have heard these things, apart from your admiration of the man, will be eager to emulate his determination, seeing that for monks the life of Anthony is a sufficient pattern for ascetical discipline. Therefore, do not refuse credence to what you have heard from those who brought tidings of him, but think rather that they have told you only a few things. For in any event, they scarcely can have given circumstances of so great import in any detail. And although I, at your request, have called to mind a few circumstances about him, and shall send as much as I can in a letter, do not neglect to question those who sail from here. For possibly when all have told their tale, the account will hardly be in proportion to his merits. On account of this, I was desirous when I received your letter to send for certain of the monks, especially those who had been more frequently with him, that if I could learn any fresh details, I might send them to you. But since the season for sailing was coming to an end, and the letter carrier urgent, I hasten to write to your piety what I myself know, having seen him many times, and what I was able to learn from him, for I was his attendant for a long time, and poured water on his hands, in all points being mindful of the truth, that no one should disbelieve through hearing too much, nor on the other hand by hearing too little should despise the man. Anthony was by birth an Egyptian. His parents were from a noble family and possessed considerable wealth. And since they were Christians, he too was brought up as a Christian. He was reared by his parents as a young child, knowing no one but them and his home. And when he had grown to boyhood, he was disinclined to learn letters because he did not want to associate with other boys. All he wanted was, as is written of Jacob, to live as a plain man at home. He should unfailingly attend church with his parents, and was neither indolent as a boy nor did he disdain them when he grew older, but was obedient to his parents and attentive to the church readings, faithfully observing what was profitable in them. Again, although he was raised in relative affluence, as a boy he didn't bother his parents for varied and rich foods, nor did he seek enjoyment in such things, but was satisfied with just what he found and asked for nothing else. After the death of his parents, he was left alone with a much younger sister. He was about 18 or 20 years old at that time and took responsibility for both her and the house. One day, hardly 6 months having passed since the death of his parents, he was on his way to church as usual. As he walked, he reflected on how the apostles abandoned everything and followed the Savior, and how the people and the acts of the apostles sold their possessions and brought the price of them and laid it at the feet of the apostles for distribution to the needy. And what great hope is laid up in heaven for such as these. With these thoughts in his mind, he entered the church just as the gospel was being read, and heard the Lord saying to the rich young man, "If thou wilt be perfect, go and sell that thou hast, and give to the poor, and thou shalt have treasure in heaven." As if his reflections on the saints were from God, and the passage had been read solely on his account, Anthony immediately went out from the church and gave to the villagers his family property, about 250 good productive acres, so that it would not become a burden to him or his sister. He sold all the other portable possessions and gave the money to the poor, reserving a little for his sister's sake. He entered the church again and heard the Lord saying in the gospel, "Be not anxious about tomorrow." He could remain no longer, but went out and gave even the last remnant to the poor, entrusting his sister to respected and faithful virgins, to be brought up in a convent. He then devoted himself to asceticism not far from his own house, watching strictly over himself and training himself with patience. For monasteries were not yet common in Egypt, and no monk knew the far desert. But those who wished to pay heed to their soul would practice asceticism alone, in proximity of their own village. Thus there was in the neighboring village an old man who had lived a solitary life from his youth. Having visited him, and being zealous for that which is good, Anthony at first began to stay in places around the village. When he heard of a great man anywhere else, he would seek him out like a wise bee, and not return to his own place until he had seen him and received supplies, as it were, for traveling on the path of virtue. There he made the beginning of his ascetical life, steadfastly keeping his resolution not to return to his family home, nor to recall his kindred, but to direct all his desire and attention to intensifying his asceticism. He labored with his hands, having heard, if any would not work, neither should he eat, and spent part of what he earned on bread, and the rest on the needy. He prayed continually, having learned that one must pray ceaselessly in secret. He paid such attention to the readings that none of what was written fell to the ground, but he kept it all, and then his memory served him instead of books. Thus conducting himself, Anthony was beloved by all. He subjected himself in sincerity to the good men he visited, and learned thoroughly every detail in which each surpassed him, whether in zeal or asceticism. He observed the graciousness of one, another's constancy in prayer. He learned one's freedom from anger, another's loving kindness. He gave heed to the vigils of one, the studies of another. He admired one for his endurance, another for his fasting and sleeping on the ground. He carefully observed the gentleness of one and the long suffering of another, and in all he noted their devotion to Christ and mutual love. Having been thus filled, he returned to his place of asceticism, henceforth striving to unite in himself all the special virtues of each, and to exemplify the virtues of all. With others of his age he had no rivalry, except that he should not be second to them in higher things. He did this in such a way as to offend no one, but rather to make them rejoice over him. All the villagers, therefore, as well as all the lovers of good that he had met, seeing what manner of man he was, called him God beloved. Some greeted him as a son, and some as a brother. The envious devil, however, the hater of good, could not endure to see such resolution in a youth, but strove to employ his artifices against him as well. First of all, he tried to draw him away from asceticism by whispering to him the memory of his property, care for his sister, kindred relations, love of money, love of glory, the various pleasures of food, and the other relaxations of life. And at last he mentioned the difficulty and great labor involved in virtue, the infirmity of the body, and the length of time such labor requires. In a word, he raised in his noose a great dust cloud of thoughts, wishing to drag him from his noble purpose. When the enemy saw himself enfeebled against Anthony's determination, however, and that he was instead conquered by the other's firmness, overthrown by his great faith, and falling through his constant prayers, He placed his confidence in his weapons, which are in the navel of his belly, and boasting in them, for they are his first snares against the young. He came upon the young man, disturbing him so at night and harassing him by day, so that even the onlookers sensed the struggle which was going on between the two. The devil would suggest foul thoughts, and he would repel them by prayers. The devil would titillate, but he, as if blushing, would fortify his body with faith, prayers, and fasting. The wretched devil even assumed the form of a woman and imitated all her mannerisms, simply to deceive Anthony, but he quenched the coal of that delusion through reflecting on Christ and the noetic ability of soul that comes through him. Again, the enemy suggested the softness of pleasure, but he, in rage and grief, turned his thoughts to the threat of eternal fire and the torment of the worm. Thus, countering the temptations, he passed through them unharmed. All this happened to the shame of the enemy, for he who thought himself to be like God was now mocked by a young man, and he who boasted over flesh and blood was now routed by a man in the flesh, for the Lord was working with him. The Lord who for us took on flesh and gave the body victory over the devil, so that all who truly struggle can say, not I, but the grace of God which was with me. In the end, the dragon could not overthrow Anthony by these things, but even saw himself pushed out of his heart, gnashing his teeth as it is written, and as if beside himself, he appeared to Anthony like a black boy, his appearance matching the color of his mind. Slinking up to him, as it were, he no longer plied him with thoughts, for the deceiver had been cast out, but at last, adopting a human voice, said, I have deceived many and cast down many, but now as I attack you in your labors, as I had many others, I am powerless. Then Anthony asked, who are you who say such things to me? He answered with a pitiful voice, I am the friend of fornication, and have undertaken all of the enticements which lead youths into it. And I am called the spirit of lust. How many who wish to live prudently have I trampled on? How many are the chaste whom I have converted by my enticements? I am he on whose account the prophet reproves the fallen, saying, you have been deluded by the spirit of fornication. For by me they have been tripped up. I am he who so often troubled you, and have as often been overthrown by you. But Anthony gave thanks to the Lord, took courage, and said to him, you are most despicable then, for your mind is black, and you are weak as a child. From now on I shall have no further thought for you, for the Lord is my helper, and I shall look down upon my enemies. Having heard this, the black one immediately fled, cringing at the words and fearing even to approach the man any more. This was Anthony's first struggle with the devil, or rather, this achievement in Anthony was the Savior's who condemned sin in the flesh, that the righteousness of the law might be fulfilled in us, who walk not after the flesh, but after the Spirit. Anthony did not relax his care and despise him. However, even though the demon was subject to him, nor did the enemy, as though conquered, cease to lay snares for him. For again he went round as a lion, seeking some opportunity against him. But Anthony, having learned from the scriptures that the wiles of the enemy are many, zealously pursued asceticism, considering that although the devil had not been able to influence his heart by bodily pleasure, he would certainly endeavor to ensnare him by other means, for the demon is a lover of sin. Therefore he suppressed and enslaved his body even more, lest having conquered in some matters, he should be dragged down in others. He accordingly resolved to accustom himself to more austere ascetical discipline. Many marveled at this, but he himself bore the labor easily, for eagerness of soul, by remaining in him so long, had developed into such a good habit in him that even a small prompting from others in some matter would move him to great zeal for it. He kept vigil so much that he would often pass the whole night without sleep, and this is not once, but often, to the wonder of many. He would eat once a day after sunset, but sometimes once in 2 days, and often even in 4. His food was bread and salt. and is drink water only. Of meat and wine it is superfluous even to speak, since no such thing was found with the other zealous men. For sleep a rush mat sufficed him, but for the most part he lay upon the bare ground. He would not anoint himself with oil, saying that young men ought rather to have zeal for asceticism, and not seek things that would enervate the body, but they must accustom it to hardships, remembering the apostles' words, "When I am weak, then I am strong." For he said, "The vitality of the soul is sound when the pleasures of the body are weakened." He held this truly exceptional axiom that progress in virtue and retirement from the world for virtue's sake ought not to be measured by time, but rather by one's yearning and resolution. Accordingly, he himself did not notice the passing of time, but every day, as if just beginning the ascetic life, he took on great labors for advancement, continually repeating to himself the saying of St. Paul, forgetting those things which are behind and reaching forth unto those things which are ahead. He was also mindful of the words of the prophet Elias, "The Lord liveth, before whom I stand today." For he observed that in saying today, the prophet did not measure the passing of time, but daily, as though always making a new beginning, he eagerly endeavored to make himself fit to appear before God, pure in heart and ever ready to obey his will and none other. He used to say to himself that the ascetic ought always to see his own life in that of the great Elias, even as in a mirror. All right. So that is the prologue and part one of the life of St. Anthony the Great. We will pick up with part two next week. Have a good week, guys.